Good. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Tiltman, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Government Procurement Law Studies here at the George Washington University Law School. I am delighted to welcome you to today's event about career paths in government contracting, sponsored by the law firm of Morrison Foerster and Northrop Grumman. I'm now going to get out of the way and turn it over to today's host, Anjali Chaturvedi. Take it away, Anjali. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks to you at GW for hosting the event, and to the rest of the panelists for joining this afternoon. So I see we have 56, by my count, participants, which is great for a rainy Wednesday afternoon. And I really want to encourage the folks that have dialed in to ask questions. So there's a Q&A function. You can type in questions there, and I would love to pass those along to my colleagues. So I could spend the whole hour and a half reciting the fabulous bios of the folks that are joined on this call this afternoon, but we thought that wasn't the way that everybody wanted to spend the time for the program. So instead, I'm going to send you to the PDF that I think you all have that goes through the bio of folks. I'm joined by my chocolate lab in the background if you see something moving around. So instead of going through the bios, what I'm going to do is invite my friends here to answer some questions about their careers. And as you answer the questions, my colleagues here will fold in maybe what they do as part of their answer, just to remind the audience the perspective that each of you are bringing in answering some of these questions. So let me start first with Caitlin Crujido at Morrison Foerster. Caitlin and I have gotten the chance to work together a bit over the last few years. And so Caitlin brings a wonderful perspective of a law firm lawyer. So Caitlin, if you would share with the group here, what has surprised you most about the career path that you have chosen?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin, as Anjali mentioned. I graduated law school in 2017, so it hasn't been that long. And I think probably one of the things that surprises me most still to this day is I didn't go to law school with the intention of practicing government contracts. I kind of fell into it. And after speaking with colleagues over the years, it kind of seems like that's pretty common amongst the group. But I think also another thing that surprised me about this career path was getting to experience a lot of different types of work. So for example, I have one bucket of my work that's litigation. I have another bucket of work that's transactional, and I have another bucket of work that is compliance related. And I don't think that I expected that there would be a field in which I could do all three of those things. And it certainly keeps the work interesting, keeps me on my toes. And yeah, I mean, it's just a really great way to kind of experience everything. And government contracts is such an interesting area that there's always something new.
Well, Caitlin, maybe I can just follow up with a question there. When you said you sort of fell into the government contract space, can you remember? Can you share kind of how that happened?
Yeah, so my first year of law school, that first summer, I went and I interned at the Department of Labor and their Office of Federal Contracts Compliance Programs. And that's kind of where I first learned what a government contract was. And then I knew that I wanted to continue kind of experiencing government. And so my 2L summer, I went and I was a law clerk at the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, which is strictly government contracts related. And that's really kind of where I immersed myself in government contracts. I had to learn it. I didn't go to GW for law school, so I didn't have all of the courses that you all are so fortunate to have. And so I really had to kind of like learn in practice and on the fly. And so it was just, I didn't know that I was going to enjoy it so much and that I was going to ultimately make a career out of it. So yeah, certainly just fell into it, but I'm glad that I did.
Well, that's great. Sounds like you got some nice opportunities in school to get some valuable experience that you've been able to put to good use.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to turn next to my good friend and colleague, Dianne Coombs. So Dianne and I have had the chance to work together. I've been at Northrop for a little over 6.5 years. Dianne, I know you've been at Northrop a bit longer than that. And I would love for you to share with the group, where do the concepts of ethics and compliance come into the work that you do and that you're a part of at Northrop Grumman?
Wow. Well, it is what I do. I'm a labor and employment lawyer, and it is what Anjali does as well. As she's the head of our government investigations group, and it all dovetails in the fact that as a government contractor, we are subject to not only the normal employment laws that every employer in the country would be subject to, but on top of that, there's a layer of laws that require that government contractors have the highest standards of ethics, and that we comply with the laws of the federal government and every state in which we operate. And we operate in all 50 states, and as well as many foreign countries. And so as a labor and employment lawyer, our employees have to abide by all these regulations. And I'll sort of go through the different areas. As I said, Anjali heads our government investigations practice because as a government contractor, you're all familiar with the concept of fraud, waste, and abuse. And we are subject to not only laws, but federal acquisition regulations that require that our employees are protected from reprisal for whistleblowing, and that we have to make mandatory disclosures. For example, when we have an employee who says they work 8 hours on a Saturday when they only worked 2 hours. So a lot of what we do is to ensure compliance with those laws, and mandatorily report what needs to be reported. We are a defense contractor, so we make lots of secretive, dangerous things that we export all over the world. And we're subject to a host of regulations dealing with import, export, but that also comes into play with compliance and ethics to ensure that we are exporting to the right countries, we're following the rules as to what we disclose when we export, et cetera. For our employees, again, we have to follow rules such as trafficking in persons, because our employees are deployed in countries where they do have trafficking of humans. And so when our employees are deployed with the military, they're actually subject to the Code of Military Justice. So part of my role is to ensure that we train our employees on what's required when they're in those countries, and also provide guidance and support when they get into trouble. I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, Dianne, I think you're right. And you could go on because, ethics and compliance are the table stakes, as they say, right, for the way that we do business in government contracting. And particularly where we're supporting, the men and women in our military, making sure that they get what they paid for and they get it at the quality that they expect. That's critical for the safety of our country. So we don't really, working in the space, there's no room to mess around in that area. And I think that's part of why the list of areas that you mentioned where we pay so much attention is critical. So, and then remind me, Dianne, how many years you've been at Northrop?
18 years.
18
and
years.
I went to GW twice. I loved it so much, both undergrad and law school.
Unsolicited plug for the law school there, folks. I did not know that was coming, but yeah, 18 years, long time. So I've seen one question come in through the Q&A, and so I'm going to go a little bit out of sequence here, and maybe I can just ask Sandeep. This is I think a good question for you maybe to tackle, which is, what's the best way for 1Ls to look for opportunities in government contracting space if they're interested in learning more about this type of work? Maybe you could share a little bit from your perspective.
Sure. So thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Sandeep Nandivada. I'm an 8th year associate now at Morrison Foerster, practicing government contracts. It's a good question because first year is often so focused on, your coursework, as it should be, because you're just getting started in law school. And oftentimes the work experience that you can get is kind of doesn't really come into focus until you start thinking about what you're going to do that first summer. But I think that's where you can start to think broadly in terms of how you can gain that work experience. So obviously, for all of you who are in DC already or at least, yeah, you're all in DC now that the semester is live again, you have these opportunities with federal agencies throughout spread across DC that have procurement offices that could benefit from associate or 1L attorney help. So I think that's kind of looking at it broadly, thinking about the different buckets. I think oftentimes you can think about it as, oh, do law firms hire 1L? Few do, but I think there's a lot of government agencies that could use assistance, and those are tremendous opportunities to kind of help the government and see the other side of procurement, not just from the private sector experience. And that can provide a lot of experience because government agencies have a lot of work. They're working on so many different matters that you can assist. You can get a lot of diversity of opportunity there. The other thing too is that when you're looking at internships, not just government agencies, but you can look at the courts. You can do internships at the Court of Federal Claims as a 1L and see if you can help a judge and get a totally different perspective of the government procurement space, because you'll then be helping the judge analyze her cases or his cases, and many of those cases will be related to procurement opportunities. So I think those are two ways you can really focus on work experience in your first year around your academic curriculum. And then more generally, I would also say is that one of the really unique things about government contracts is that it requires skill sets that you can develop in a lot of different areas as well. So I think one way to look at it is that you don't necessarily have to work in government procurement that first summer in order to develop skill sets that would be applicable in future years as a government procurement attorney. For example, I mean, the number of attorneys who are now doing government procurement work who originally started at DOJ doing more diverse white-collar work or investigations work. I mean, so many folks at Northrop Grumman fall in that bucket. They were former AUSAs. So I think thinking of it more holistically into how can I get the skill sets that I need to be successful as a government procurement attorney, that will kind of open up a lot of different doors, and you can then pursue those opportunities and get that experience.
Thanks, Sandeep. And Jay, I'm seeing you nod your head, particularly when Sandeep was referencing opportunities that 1Ls might be able to find in the government. Do you want to add anything to maybe what 1Ls might look into?
Sure. I was actually a serial internship participant, especially from the GW program, had a lot of contacts. So probably I maybe have overdid it, but I think you can get opportunities for your 1L summer at different agencies. I know a lot of friends, and I worked at the Pentagon and got some experience in some aerospace industry for the Air Force. You can look at agencies that focus on that kind of work if you're specifically interested in an industry. But frankly, any kind of sort of global work that has something to do with government procurement, whether it be at one agency or another, I think is really helpful. One really great opportunity that I think students don't always think about is if you can manage your schedule and you can get the credits, doing those opportunities outside of just your 1L summer, doing them in the fall or the spring really allows you an opportunity to kind of gain more experience at different organizations or different agencies. And I think that's really helpful, especially this is a really unique time in one way, because you won't be able to always go into an office, but you also, if you're not in DC at this time, you can still intern with different agencies. I'm at DOJ now. We have lots of interns. My last mentee was working in Michigan, but we were still working on government work together. And it's a great opportunity to get those chances to work at places that maybe location-wise you wouldn't have. So I highly encourage it. Don't tire yourself out too much though.
It sounds like you did a lot, Jaya, to
yeah.
gain a lot of experience. Well, look, that's one of the benefits, I think, of being at school in Washington, D.C., that federal agencies, are generally housed in this area, and they do take on younger, less experienced students, sometimes even college students. We did that at the Department of Justice, for example. So a lot of Googling and reaching out to people like the people that are on this Zoom, I think is a valuable way to see what opportunities exist. So we got another question in the chat, which I'm going to send to my other colleague. I have two colleagues on this call, which is so nice. Robert Wu from Northrop Grumman. So Robert, there's a question about using outside counsel when you're in-house. Can you talk a little bit about, why it is when you're in-house that you would engage the services of, for example, a fine firm like Morrison and Foerster, and what you're looking for when you're hiring outside counsel?
Sure, Anjali, happy to answer that question and happy to be here, and thank you to GW for the invitation today. Working in-house, we have very limited resources. Some do. Some companies may engage more in-house attorneys and may use less outside counsel, but it's really that kind of balancing of resources. And so, with respect to Northrop Grumman, we have a very lean, I think, Office of General Counsel or Law Department. And so for the expertise that we don't necessarily have in-house, we will cultivate strong relationships with, for example, MOFO attorneys who will bring in on those issues that are really either novel, we don't have in-house expertise on, or perhaps, Anjali, as you know, in the area where you work, there's sometimes a benefit to having an outside counsel representing the company for matters that are dealing with regulatory agencies, US government, providing that extra layer. So there's any number of reasons why Northrop Grumman one or what I would think of, other companies might be retaining outside counsel. And it's really situationally dependent, and it really is an added value, in my opinion, to what the in-house folks can do.
Yeah, that's great, Robert. You're of course exactly right. We lean on law firm lawyers to provide subject matter expertise. Sometimes, quite frankly, it's also bandwidth. To be able to handle a matter quickly, we may need just the additional resources. And in a strong pitch for like my colleagues at Northrop Grumman, I mean, we are people that take a lot of pride in the depth of our own knowledge and experience. And so we are very much a hands-on company, and that is something that may be different company by company. Caitlin and Sandeep might have a view about that. There's some companies that just feel more comfortable in certain space and feel less comfortable in others. But being the type of in-house lawyer where you are a go-to person, where colleagues trust your judgment, is a really valuable place to be, I think, as an in-house lawyer. All right, let me keep moving because I could just keep talking about some of these things. So Maria, thank you for joining and offering the perspective of someone in the government, the GSA. That the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is one that I think we're reading a lot about and seeing how different organizations are dealing with those issues, particularly in the last year and a half, after the murder of George Floyd, and issues about social justice and making sure that people feel like they belong. And that word just itself, diversity, is a big word. So what does that word mean to you, and how does it show up in the work that you do and at the agency that you work at?
Thanks, Anjali. Yeah, as I talked before with Anjali, and I said diversity means different things to different people, or there are just many ways. The whole point of diversity is like many viewpoints or many ways to look at something. So the more traditional sense that we hear about obviously is like race, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, that sort of stuff. As Anjali referenced, that's been in the spotlight lately. And so I'll address that, and I'll also address another perspective I have on diversity. And so with regards to the diversity in terms of how we're used to seeing diversity in terms of gender, race, etc., that's been in the forefront a lot lately, and it's actually part of the president's agenda. And he has issued a few executive orders actually using government contracts law as a tool or an avenue, one avenue of several avenues to actually sort of broaden the conversation, and not just the conversation, but the actions, and as a conduit for change in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And so as we learn more about this, we keep, the perspective keeps getting broader and broader. So I'm very involved in pretty much all the executive orders that come out right now that have anything to do with procurement, because I am the GSA Procurement Ombudsman. And my role is to foster healthy and productive relationships between GSA and its industry partners, so the people we do business with, contractors. We're trying to change culture, because our government culture tends to be, we're the government, we tell you what to do, and you listen, you do what we say. But we're realizing that that's not really the best business model, and that, or we can't do what we do and meet our mission without our industry partners. So we need to change our mindset and foster that kind of healthy relationship. So one of the things I do is to hear complaints and or answer questions from contractors who may have some difficulty getting issues resolved related to procurement in GSA, and I'm like the last resort. My whole job is to try and prevent the lawsuits and the protests and the claims that we get, if we can resolve it before it gets to that point. So I'm very involved with as I said, the executive orders, and we are wrapping our hands around how do we become more inclusive in procurement in general, not just for the people listed in the EO, for everybody. Government contracts, it's frankly a pain in the rear end because it's very difficult to understand it in the FAR and all the regulations and the compliance and layers of different things that we as a government should try to simplify things so that people, anybody, can understand, who wants to do business with the government, who has the drive, the desire to be able to do that without having to hire a lawyer to decipher the language that we're saying. Now, that's a big undertaking, but that's one way in which diversity is being addressed. We're trying to, and it'll come out in the near future, some of our plans of what we're trying to do to kind of make the entrance into the government procurement space easier for new contractors, for new small businesses, for people who fit into those categories, sort of articulated in the EO, but pretty much for everybody, because if we make it simple for once, it applies to everybody. So that's one way. I would also say their diversity in experience is very important in the work that I do. If I look back on my career path, and I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and I started off as a law clerk, and then I actually went to a large law firm and I practiced labor and employment litigation for 3 years, but I did not like being a practicing lawyer. I'm an extrovert by nature, and you go to law school and you watch TV, or you watch TV and you have an idea of what the law is, and you think you're going to be out there arguing and talking all the time, because I'm a talker. And then I get to the law firm, I'm like, this is a really solitary type of profession. You spend most of your time reading and writing and research, and that's a lot of quiet time, at least for somebody like me. And so I found that private practice just did not suit me at all. And so I decided I wanted to be able to always use my legal skills and education to do something that I liked. And I ended up, by contacts, ended up working for a subdivision of the United Technologies Corporation, which Otis Elevator Company was a subdivision of that. I went there, and because I had the background in employment law, I ran their EO and compliance department. So did that for a few years. I was living in Connecticut at the time, because that's where I went to law school. And then decided I did not like living in Connecticut. It was boring. I needed to move somewhere more exciting. And so Otis very generously agreed to create this job for me, where they were as part of United Technologies, they were the commercial end of the company, and United Technologies Corporation is a government contracts aerospace company. And UTC had, for short, it's now Raytheon, but they merged with Raytheon, but they wanted to keep the commercial business separate from the government contracts business because of the complication. But Otis decided they wanted to get into that government market space, and they decided to hire a lawyer rather than a business person to actually start up and run their government business sector, because they figure it's easier to teach somebody the business rather than the law. So they created this job for me, moved me to DC. I got here, and I'll be honest with you, I thought I was going to be at the job for a year and then leave. I didn't know anything about government contracts. I just took the job because they were moving me to where I wanted to go and they were paying for it. And lo and behold, I fell in love. And government contracts are one of those things, you either fall in love or you hate it. And so I fell in love, and then I realized, oh, this stuff is serious and I don't even know all this stuff. So Otis, again, kind of paid for me to go to GW to get my LLM. So that I could have some subject matter expertise in procurement law. And so I did that, and I started up and ran that business for 6.5 years and was pretty successful and completely different experience. Now I learned business, like I learned how to run a business. And then I got the company, I was one of the other person who negotiated the contract for the first ever elevator company to be on GSA schedules. That was me. And so that experience is so totally different from anything I would have imagined, but it really helped. And so years later, when I decided to join GSA, I came into their suspension and debarment division, and I did protest, agency level protest, and became the suspension and debarment official and the agency protest official for GSA. And all that background I had in running and starting up the business helped me a lot in the suspension and debarment and agency protest role, because one of the things that I noticed coming from the private sector into government is that there are a lot of people who have spent their entire careers in government, so they have no concept of what an actual contractor faces, like what to do business with the government, what does it take, what are the hurdles, what are the struggles, how difficult it is to comply, that sort of thing. And so that experience of being in the private sector and actually running a government contracts business was so helpful when I came to GSA and had to deal with contractors. I mean, I didn't have the most pleasant job.
So Maria, let me break in here. I can tell that you're an extrovert, which is awesome. My husband and son are also extroverts. But the reason I want to pause is what I think you have just shared in your story is that the diversity of experience can be incredibly valuable and unexpected, right? The turns that it provides in a career and the opportunities it can provide in a career are valuable. And it's also that diversity of background and experience that gets us to the best answers. So
absolutely,
yeah, in your role at GSA, that private sector experience, as you said, very important. And then your personality and wanting to connect with other people, I assume must help you get to good answers because you're reaching out and connecting the dots to make sure that the right decision is being reached. And if that is a definition of diversity, I would agree, right? Connecting different dots to make sure that we get a good ethical response result that we feel good with.
Absolutely. The diversity experience leads to a better solution. I had to sum it up, better solution for whatever issue you're facing.
Yeah. I went to an event a couple of years ago and somebody described this, you guys may have heard this before, but if diversity is inviting different people to come to a dance, inclusion is making sure that all the people actually dance at the event. And the last word, belonging, is making sure people are invited to play their own playlists.
Exactly.
Right. So there's levels of looking at this issue, and I'm really glad to hear that, you know, at GSA, it's something that is clearly a passion of yours and something that the government is paying a lot of attention to. I know that we at Northrop and my friends at MoFo spend a lot of time thinking and talking about these issues as well. So let me keep going because we're at 4:30. I know there's some more questions. I'm going to try to work the questions in from the chat to some of these follow-on questions. So Sandeep, one of the questions that came in was, you know, you are now a very experienced white-collar government contracts lawyer. Can you talk to the group about what that means? What do you do? Day to day? Yeah.
Sure. So in terms of the white-collar investigations work, a lot of it really is just about both fact finding and then I think a little bit of storytelling, right? It's understanding what the facts actually are versus what the facts are as alleged, and then being able to piece together all of the different facts that you're getting from different sources, sometimes conflicting, sometimes supporting, and being able to weave together an actual narrative that you can then share with, you know, your clients, whether internal, external, share with the government as needed. So that's one of the things I really like about investigations work generally. It's that you dive in when there's an issue that has arose and you're trying to figure out, well, what are the facts surrounding this? And oftentimes the allegations that come up are incomplete. They're based on an incomplete understanding. And you may have immediate reactions to what you see or hear, but then as you go deeper into the allegations, you discover maybe there's a little bit of a nuance here that this is the actual concern. So it's kind of like peeling an onion in that you have maybe an initial reaction to it, but then as you go through the layers, you find out that maybe there's a different concern that wasn't really even the subject of your review, but it's actually the concern that you ought to be reviewing. So that's kind of I think one of the things that's really drawn me to that work is it gives you a really great opportunity to, one, get to know your client, get to know how their business runs. You learn about their policies, their procedures, where holes are in those policies and procedures, and how you can help your client, you know, develop even better policies and procedures and prevent some of the issues that have come up over the years. So it's a kind of an opportunity to work in partnership with your client. And so that's kind of a really great way to both help your client in that moment of need, but also just build a long-term relationship because you just get more intimately familiar with how they do business.
Yeah, that's great, Sandeep, and you do an incredibly good job at that. I've relied on you over the years many times, and we were even lucky enough. Sandeep was seconded to Northrop Grumman for a period of time a few years ago, so he came over and basically worked as a full-time Northrop employee for several months, and I think, Sandeep, you would agree that gave you another perspective of how a company works and how our company works. And that even deepened the relationship even further, which was fantastic.
Absolutely. I would say during that stint, you get a full appreciation for, one, just how many matters, issues in-house counsel have on their plate at any one given moment. Robert mentioned earlier how busy things can get, and it's true. And then you kind of see how you can be a resource as an outside counsel to in-house counsel, because you realize just how many different stakeholders they're answering to, how many different issues, and and it really helped me, I think, understand how I can make in-house counsel's job easier on a day-to-day basis. Because while I was seconded, I worked with MoFo, but I also worked with a lot of other law firms, and that helped also, you know, it gave me some additional tips on how I can grow as an attorney. So it was a tremendously valuable experience. Anjali has a great team. I love working with everyone there. So it was a great all around experience.
Great. Well, let me flip over to my my colleague here in the government. So Vijaya, if you would maybe share a little bit about, you know, your work in the government contract space, and also some of the challenges you find on the government side that some of the students might like to hear about.
Sure. So I'm a trial attorney in the National Court section of the Department of Justice. I work on a lot of government contracts issues. I litigate cases in front of the Court of Federal Claims and the Federal Circuit. And I do everything from bid protests. One day I could be working on a bid protest. Next day I could be working on a contract claim. And those contract claims can range from a termination for default to a dispute over delay claims, and it can really run the gambit of things that I do on a daily basis. What is really interesting about working for DOJ, and I'll just kind of give a short history. So I started working in the government contract space as an agency counsel. So I just worked for the Department of Labor. Caitlin, I don't think we overlapped during that time. And I worked on the agency level litigation, which is in front of GAO, in front of the boards of contract appeals. And you're really focused on what is the agency's mission? How do we deal with the specific and unique issues that DOL is facing, and what are their solicitation requirements, what are their needs to fulfill their programs. And then I went to a law firm, I went to Holland and Knight, and I worked on a lot of different issues for a lot of different contractors. And everyone has been talking about how seeing different perspectives and being in different spaces will make you grow as a lawyer. And I'll say that working there and working directly with contractors has really sharpened my insight into what a contractor faces and how much in the dark they are sometimes about the government processes. And from there, I came over to DOJ, and together the collective experiences I think are very helpful. In terms of the challenges that we face, DOJ works with a lot of federal agencies. They're not just, when I was an agency counsel, I had one agency, one mission. Now I'm looking at the missions of all different agencies. Sometimes I don't necessarily know the intricate details, so I'm looking at what they're procuring, what's important to them, how we can help them get to whatever issue is coming up on their contract. And usually by the time it gets to DOJ, something really bad has happened. So I think that the challenges and the legal issues are so fascinating. And just getting to practice government contracts in the federal court is really unique. Sometimes you're actually educating the court. I don't want to say educate, but you're sort of giving them a little bit more insight of what's happening down in the weeds, what's happening in the regulations. Why is this really important to us? And so I think that's sometimes the challenge, is to try to sort of herd cats. That often happens in bid protests when everybody wants, everything right away, and you kind of have to take a step and make sure we're dealing with things one at a time. And so I think that's really challenging. But I will say, one of the nice things is being able to have an experience that sees the perspective from my client, from the agency, and knowing what they're going through, what that agency counsel is going through, and understanding why they really need whatever requirement they have. It's not that they're just buying things. They have to, I was working on a bid protest with some air tankers, and they're dropping fire retardant, and they need these because they really have to put out fires during the fire season. And then understanding where the contractor is coming from is if we don't, deal with this bid protest in a quick and efficient fashion, that client is going to lose a lot of money and, lose other opportunities. And then moving on to the government and into DOJ, and just understanding, looking at the whole government mission and what we want to do in terms of our policy for government contracting. And I think that's been the most unique challenge, is now seeing it on a higher level, that you're not just looking at one agency's mission, you're looking at across the board. How are we presenting those different policies as part of the Justice Department as the United States? And so
thank you. Yeah, thanks, Jaya. I mean, what I'm picking up, to Sandeep and Jaya both talking about their work, there's obviously some common threads, right? There's a lot of gathering of facts and information, kind of understanding what the clients, right? What's really important to them? Why does it matter? To the extent that they have a worry or they have stress about something, that's a big component of the work. Understanding the rules and regulations is certainly critical for providing the right, legal, ethical advice. But gathering the data and understanding what's the issue is really important. And that's a skill that we all bring. That is not something that you actually just learn in law school. That's right.
It's not. You really develop that over time, and yeah. I had to learn how to be very patient to hone those skills.
Yeah, but it's a good reminder. It's a good reminder of the humanity of the work, right? And I would just add, right, with clients or colleagues that are involved in some legal matter, taking the time to explain and make sure that they understand what's happening is such a big part of the job, because if they're not familiar, if they don't understand, that worry and fear can become consuming. So, both of you, I think, very much conveyed that critical component of a skill that sadly there's not a class, but we all bring it. So that's really nice. All right, so this is a question that I've been dying to ask my friend Robert here for a while, which is, Robert, what advice would you give to your law school self with now the years of wisdom that you have acquired as a government contracts lawyer?
Interesting question, Anjali. And certainly I have years. I'm not sure I have wisdom. But you know, the typical answer is get good grades. But I would submit that probably as important or maybe more important is cultivating your network. And GW, for those of you, I'm sure the folks on this call recognize that GW is a pillar. It is absolute 800-pound gorilla in the room in the government contracts community. It is that big. And if you don't realize that, you should realize that. What you should also realize is the government, and I didn't just say that for Dean Tillotman's edification. It is absolutely true. The government contracts community, whether it be government side, in-house counsel, or law firms, is a small community, and we get to know each other. I may call up, you know, Vijaya or Sandeep or Maria and ask them if they want to grab a beer sometime. I actually may very well do that. But you know, I worked on the government side with the Army for a while. I got to know folks at the Government Accountability Office. I used the connections that I got from the Army, as well as with GW, to get my job at GAO. When I walked in for my interview at GAO, I think Dan Gordon had already spoken to them because they knew me before I got into that room. Same thing when I made the decision to come over to Northrop Grumman. You know, the ability to be known and be seen within this community it's very important. So you had that question before about, as a 1L, how do I, you know, find that opportunity? Well, you know, you could go on the internet and be competitive with everybody else, or you could have the in because you have that network and you know who's got the jobs and where, or if you've really impressed somebody, you know, and they're in an agency and they know a job is coming, they may know to contact you, or they may know certainly to contact Dean Tillotman or Professor Eukins or Professor Schooner and say, hey, we have this opportunity. And if any of them like you, and if you've done a great job in government contracts, they'll know to say, hey, I know X. And you've already got that in with the agency or the private company or the law firm. And so, you know, I went to a different law school way back when. I won't mention who it is or where it was, but they did not have this level of network that GW has, particularly within this government contracts community. And so, you know, if I were anybody on this call, I might want to reach out to the folks who are presenting here because we're here for a reason. I suspect, I know I'm here because I went to the LLM program. I feel like I owe Professor Schooner, who got me into the program, and Professor Eukins and Professor, various other people that I'm here and I'm willing to help. And so if you have questions, even outside of this call, and you want to learn about the Army or GAO or Northrop Grumman or anything else I may have to share, it's a sincere offer. I'm here for you. And so I'll leave it at that as part of your network.
Thanks, Robert. That's great advice. And Caitlin, let me just, before we switch gears, I just love to hear your any additional thoughts about networking. I think, you know, for law students, that word sometimes can be a little triggering, right? Like, what can I do as a law student? How do I, you know, Robert says I should reach out to him. Should I really reach out to him? Or any of the other people? Do you have any advice you want to pass on to these students?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Robert's advice is good advice. You should absolutely reach out to him or anyone else on this panel. I know that when I get cold emails, I will always make time because I think that takes some courage. It takes the time. It shows me that you are serious and that you're interested and you're taking the initiative, and all those things are good qualities. And so, you know, if I were to receive an email from someone who said, I saw you on this panel and I'd really just like to get additional information on your background and your career, I will be happy to have a Zoom chat with you or whatever. I also will second that the government contracts bar is small, and you see the same people at the same events year after year. And if you're, I think that it's really important to just, get out there and go meet people. And, when I was a law clerk at the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, the judges were very adamant about us getting out and going to networking events and meeting people. And, as I mentioned, I didn't go to GW, so I, had to work, it seemed like a little bit harder to just meet people in the field. And I found all of those events that I went to just be really beneficial. And, I came to MoFo, through a connection. I found MoFo through a connection through one of the judges that I worked for. And it's kind of crazy how small it is, and you see the same people from case to case in different settings, and it's actually probably one of my favorite things about being a GovCon attorney. I like being able to know people in this field and feeling like it's not so overwhelming, and the people are also just really, really nice. So I think that they would all be willing to help, and so you should definitely take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for foot stomping, those opportunities. I guess I'll just add, networking, I think also in law school means getting to know your classmates, because the person that you're sitting next to, maybe, whether, in person or virtually, might be someone that's on a hiring committee at a law firm or a company or on a government panel, 5, 10, 15 years from now. And isn't it nice when that person says, oh yeah, that's the person I sat next to in government contracts, or that's the person I did my legal research and writing class with. So, if reaching out to a practicing lawyer seems like a lot, put your mind to thinking about your colleagues and shared interests, and then cultivating those relationships. It doesn't mean, you have to be BFFs, of course, but where you see the person has done something on LinkedIn, sending them a note and just applauding them, supporting them. Those types of connections, I think, over time can prove to be incredibly valuable, right? We all know the people in school that we liked a lot and thought would be great colleagues, and maybe the people we didn't know or didn't have that impression of. So don't lose sight that your network is also your peer group.
Anjali, can I just add one small
Please.
thing? So I always tried to do this when I was in the government, and I still do that now, which is just to keep in touch with people in the bar. I think it's really important. You do a lot of networking as a law student, but when you graduate and you're going into your field, if you go to a firm, there's a lot of incentive to go out and go to the events. But if you happen to go into the government, I think it's important to still stay connected, still participate, as much as you're, obviously clear it with your ethics department. But I found it very educational over the last several years to go to the programs that the ABA hosts and just talk to other people at conferences about the different legal issues, and to do that maybe because I like government contracts so much and it's intellectually stimulating, but it also will help you because you'll be dealing with issues, and sometimes something that you learned at a conference or case you heard at the West Year in Review will then spark your research or help you address an issue that you might find kind of different than what you normally have to deal with. So
that's great. Thank you. Yeah, good perspective. So let me go back to my friend Dianne. Dianne, there's a question in the chat that is a very practical question. It is the type of question that I would be calling you about at the company. So I'm going to send it to you, which is, if somebody is working in the federal government in a government contracts capacity, what sort of things do they keep in mind for conflict of interest purposes if they want to move in-house? There's a unique body of law, right, around conflicts of interest that apply to the work that we do. So you are an expert in this field. Please share.
Well, I am going to say I avoid this area as much as possible. The revolving door restrictions are tough and they're varied. It depends on what sort of position you have in the government, what role you play. Are you doing procurement? Are you involved in making decisions with respect to government contractors? And so before, the law provides that before Northrop could even entertain hiring someone who's a current government employee, there are a number of things we have to do to vet the employee to ensure that we're not going to run afoul of any of those rules. So, just be mindful that before, if you're searching for a job, if you're a current government employee and you're searching for a job, you should check with your agency's ethics officer to get an opinion. And when I say even as a government employee, that includes if you're in the military as well. You should always check to ensure that you get an ethics opinion as to what your limitations are. And if you're, before applying for a job, any good government contractor, such as Northrop Grumman, will for its part put you through a series of questions to ensure that we can even talk to you. Because even just speaking with you about employment opportunities can be a violation of the revolving door restrictions. So I guess my first advice is to talk to your agency ethics officer, understand what your limitations are, and then ensure that you properly disclose your restrictions, your current position, what programs you're working on to any potential employer before engaging in employment discussions. And you should be safe.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. So, I mean, I think just that example amplifies the interesting work that goes on in the space of government contracts. That those types of restrictions and government regulations are obviously critical. And you spoke earlier about, keeping a very high ethical standard in this space. And that is obviously one area that folks that are moving from the government into the private sector need to be mindful of.
Anjali, can I just add one other thing to what Diane said? In addition to if you're searching for a job, you actually really should also take an extra step if you're asked to be like part of an ABA committee, to chair, or to be a board member of something, even things that you might that are not job related per se. You do need to go, get an ethics opinion before you accept any invitation to become members of any kind of association, boards, that sort of thing, or even some volunteer work that you do depending on what the work is. So
yeah, no, that's good reminder. So there's lots of places to check as you're making moves in the government or leaving the government. So I do want to make sure I pass this along to the GW alums. There's a question. Someone's asking, can you recommend classes at GW that might be good classes for someone interested in the government contract space to take? And so as we're nearing the end, if you have any classes that meant a lot to you at GW, maybe the speakers can type those into the chat so that folks can take that down if they want. So anything that you had really enjoyed or thought was really helpful, that might be a nice thing to share with the students. So that's a good question. So as we're coming towards the end of our 5 o'clock hour, I want to come back, Maria, to you. And, I think your enthusiasm about this work has come through, but I wanted to give you the chance to really make it loud and clear to the students why this type of work, government contracts work, is a good area to work in for students now while in school, and then maybe even after they graduate.
Okay, it's good for school, because I think somebody had asked earlier, how was an 1L to get in, to get some experience. It's good for school because GW has an excellent externship program. And I used to run the suspension debarment division, protest division, and I've hired like maybe 60 or more interns over the past 12 years. And we go to law schools for those because the government doesn't have the resources to pay a lot of the students, even for summer or fall, but because you have this extension program where you get the credits for the work experience, that really is one of the reasons why it's such a good area to get in and to get experience from. And we, as a hiring person, as a manager or director who hires people a lot, I care about your experience. It really doesn't matter to me whether you were paid or unpaid. That is completely irrelevant. It's the experience you have, because the more you can hit the ground running when you come in, then yes, that's really what I'm looking for as somebody who runs programs. So that's important. The other thing, I think the question you asked again, it was like, why is it, can you remind me?
Yeah, I just was hoping you can share, your enthusiasm for this so that students walk away committed to this type of work or exploring this type of work while they're students.
Right. And so, I mean, I go back to, because as I said this before, this work is not for everybody, right? So it has to be that if you like it, then that's really your driver. If you don't like it and you're not interested, go find what you like. And part of being diverse is be who you are. Figure out who you are and what you like, not what people think you should do, or what somebody else wants you to do, or what looks the best. It's you're going to be happiest doing what was meant for you to do that makes you happy. Just like I long ago realized that private practice was not for me. That's why I'm passionate about what I do, because I found what I like to do when I do it. But I'll say, in particular, government contracts, one of the reasons I like it is there is an opportunity to make a huge impact on a broad cross-section of people, organizations, countries, laws, policies. It's so broad, so international. Part of why I like my job is I get to see the impact of the work that I do all the time. And that's what's important to me. For some other people, it might be something else, but it's never boring if you're actually into this stuff. I mean, there's always something challenging. So if you like it, pursue it. There's a place for you, and you just have to find it. So if that's the advice I'd give, is get to know what you like and what you really want to do and go after that, whatever that is, whether it's government contracts or some other field of law, or if it's not even law at all, but using your skills and your education, go after that. That's what will make you happy.
That is a great place, I think, to end the panel, the prepared discussion. But I did want to stay on for a couple of more minutes in case there are any other questions that anyone in the audience wants to put into the Q&A. I hope I covered all of them, or I think all of them, but if I missed something, I'll just give it another minute to just see if there's anything else that comes in.
There's one question that I didn't see answered about government contracting staying long-term. Did you see that?
Oh, yes, that's right. Okay, so that so I think somebody was curious about whether or not this was a profession that people, or this was a field that people stayed in for a long time. Dianne, I think you said 17 years at Northrop Grumman, which seems like a good long time. I mean, does anybody want to offer their thoughts about whether this is a field of law that someone could really spend some quality time in over the years? Yeah, Robert, please.
I'm happy to add my thoughts on that, and it'll kind of tie into the last question about why you should do this. And it really comes down to two words: it's job security. The federal government will always be spending money. Contractors will always be accepting that money and performing. And heaven forbid, sometimes they have issues. So you'll need litigators and you'll need judges. And so there's not many industries out there that have such a robust and consistent funding stream that you can make an entire 30-year career out of it. Now, whether that's at one company or with one agency, that's a different question. And people do. I know plenty of people that spend their entire careers in one place. But I'm an example, and it sounds like others on this panel are an example of folks that, if you cultivate those relationships, you can move around to whatever suits your needs. And if you move, for example, to Northrop Grumman, which is a defense contractor, you're building a skill set that could then lead you to go to a .com or something that doesn't do government contracting, but you've now got that transferable skill set. And so, I think you could spend an entire career in government contracts in any given number of fields or any subfields that will suit your interests.
Jaya, yeah, please.
So I think I completely agree with Robert, and I just want to highlight one thing. The government buys a lot of things. It's not just big defense, I guess systems, but they buy a lot of different things, and it's everything from construction work to aerospace to IT to just pens. I think it's important that you could create a career that could dovetail in a lot of different sections and a lot of different industries as well. We're one industry of the government contracts, but it really expands to a lot of different portions of I guess, I keep using the word industry, but a lot of different purchasing power. So you could be doing government contracts in a lot of different spaces. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love it. You never know what you're going to be purchasing or dealing with next when you work in kind of maybe at a law firm or in the government. So I think you could really use this experience as a sort of central focus point and expand to a lot of different fields.
And
Great.
Anjali, I'll add to that is not only is it a broad field, there are different areas of the law once you have the basic understanding of government contracts that you can move into. And I've seen people come into Northrop Grumman as government contract attorneys, just doing what we call operations law, supporting the business. But they've also then moved into areas such as import-export control. If they decide they don't want to practice straight government contracting law, we have folks who then focus on things like what I do labor and employment law. I took a government contracting course. The first thing when I joined Northrop Grumman's law department is they sent me to the West Publications government contracting course so I could understand government contracts. But I'm a traditional labor and employment lawyer, but over the years I've learned all different things about the FAR, and I've been able to apply that within the company. I also support our Office of Corporate Responsibility, which is our ethics group. And we, as Northrop Grumman, we donate lots of money to different organizations, and I support that. So even though I'm not doing, again, straight government contract law, by being there, you're able to use that skill set and apply it elsewhere. So I think it's an interesting area. Once you have the background, you can look around and see what else you find interesting and apply the government contracting background to other areas of any corporation.
Great. Caitlin or Sandeep, do you want to add anything on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things I'd add is, and this is probably true of most, highly regulated areas of the law, is that your experience kind of just compounds over the years. So you just get better at it too. And so I think one of the things with government contracting is that you're just as a matter of fact, you're going to be better at it 10 years out than you are 3 years out. And so it's one of the reasons why it does encourage you to stick around, just because you're not going to reach a point of diminishing returns anytime soon. You're going to keep growing. The more you dive into these issues, the more times you see the same issue, the better you're going to get at addressing it. And so I think that's one of the other key perks. And then I'll also just say that, even you can stay a long time in government contracts and develop these diverse skill sets that allow you to kind of branch out into different areas. And so that's just one other thing to keep in mind, that you can be in government contracting for 10 years and then go take a completely different position that's not procurement related, but that leverages the skills you've developed because of the diversity of work that you get as a government contract attorney. So I think that you kind of have the best of both worlds. You can stay in the profession for a long time and just continue to get better at it and really start getting the really nuanced issues, or you can develop a broad enough skill set that you can then translate to a different area of the law.
Caitlin, since we started with you, is there anything you want to add before we wrap here?
I think just one other thing to piggyback off of what Sandeep said was, that, government contracts is already kind of a niche field, but there's so many opportunities to become an expert within different areas of government contracts. And so if you're really, eager to become some sort of subject matter expert in a government contracts area, like I know CFIUS came to mind, you could be like, have some expertise in CFIUS and be a really valuable member of a government contracts team. Same with national security or investigations. There's just so many different ways to kind of like become a really instrumental part of a team. And, with that, I mean, government contracts is awesome. And I really would encourage you all to at least pursue it in some respect, whether it's just taking a course or, doing an internship or an externship. I mean, those opportunities are so invaluable, and you will only benefit from them. So highly recommend.
All right, so that's the hashtag. Government contracts are awesome, I think, for the session for this evening. I'm not seeing any more Q&As pop up. So Jessica, unless you want us to stay on, I think I'd like to really just thank the panelists, Robert, Maria, Dianne, Caitlin, Jaya, and Sandeep. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your enthusiasm and your insight. Thank you, Jessica, and the staff at GW for putting this on, making sure all the IT worked. And thanks to my friend Alex Ward at MoFo for partnering on this really wonderful opportunity to share our thoughts about this field of government contracts. So I hope everybody has a good night. I think the rain, at least where I am at, has slowed down a bit. So I hope you all stay dry and stay well. And good luck to all the students. You guys have been through an incredible challenge as students. And I really wish you all the best of luck as you continue in your career. So good night.
Okay. Bye.